Okay, on today's video, I will endeavour to answer the question, which is better, Oppenheimer, the movie, or the book it's based on, which is called American Prometheus? I'll start with talking about the movie. When I saw it early in the year, I thought it was okay. I came out as a sort of solid movie. I'm not a big Nolan fan. My expectations were pretty low. But I think he found a subject matter that suits him. He's good at telling stories about a bunch of blokes putting a project together, and the story of the Trinity test is a pretty good fit for Nolan. There are things, the more I think about it and reflect on the movie, I struggle to remember things about it that I particularly liked. There was a lot of things that wound me up, like the constant music. A lot of people have mentioned this. That thing that South Park mocked Nolan for, the running all the way through the movie, making it feel like it is in fact a 3.5-hour trailer for a movie called Oppenheimer. I also thought the whole start of the movie was really bad. I thought we were in for a stinker of a film. First half hour, the whole his time at Cambridge and his youth. There were these kind of jump cut flashes of particle effects that felt very student horror movie. And it does, unfortunately, feature quite a lot of Robert Downey Jr., which is a shame. Cillian Murphy was good. If I was being really harsh, I would question whether or not he was as good as everybody said. He seemed to spend a lot of the movie looking like a lizard or a snake that has swallowed too much. You know, like that might be too many hooves for its colon. One thing I will defend the film on is most of the reviews obviously sing its praises. Christopher Nolan can do no wrong in the eyes of a vast swathe of film criticism. But the few critics that have actually had a go at it, one of the accusations was that not only did he not show some degree of the Japanese experience, but actually the film is almost a misty-eyed bit of propaganda for nuclear warfare. I didn't get that impression at all, and I don't know what film they watched. I think it was, in fact, clumsily the other way. I don't think Christopher Nolan should step out in front of the camera and say, by the way, I disapprove of all this. I wish we hadn't made a nuclear bomb. But I think he actually did do that. I think he did it in a really sort of lead-footed way. In fact, there's a scene that kind of summarizes my frustrations with Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker, and it was the victory speech that Oppie gives after... I'm sorry, I'm calling him Oppie because of the book. I'll come to that in a sec. Oppenheimer gives after the bomb is dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It starts in this really, really effective, I thought, and unsettling way. He's like walking through the bleachers of this, up to where he's going to give his speech, and the sound design sort of merges from crowd noise to, is that a siren in the background? There's just this kind of uncanny, slightly unreal, nauseous feeling, and it mixes really well, I think, with the nerves of a big moment, a banal big moment like giving a speech, and something terrible taking place in another world. And maybe the way I've described it sounds a bit cheesy, but in the cinema, I thought that bit was really, really effective. But of course, Christopher Nolan has to sort of make it really, really blunt, and Oppenheimer starts seeing, I think, burn victims in the audience, and then as he leaves, puts his foot through a vision of a corpse which looks like it has been turned to ash. So he literally puts his foot in it. It was a surprise that in his nude scene, Cillian Murphy didn't have consumed by tattooed on one butt cheek and guilt in the other. So yeah, better than Christopher Nolan's other films, but still not great. The book I read afterwards, American Prometheus by Martin J. Sherwin and Kai Bird, and I thought it was fantastic. Really, really different. Although there are so many bits where it's obvious what Nolan's taken. I was surprised at how sort of wholesale scenes were taken from the book and put into the script. Not only scenes, but whole structural bits of the design of the film. I don't think the fusion fission part aspect to the film, but there was a line that was something like it was directed to Robert Downey Jr.'s character Lewis, and someone said, the problem with you is you see the world as black and white, but it's all shades of grey. This was a real quote in the book. And of course, Lewis is Robert Downey Jr.'s character, and he heads the black and white part. I think the idea of the film being after the Trinity test, Oppenheimer's history is sort of set in stone. His fate is sealed, his myth is made, he is part of history. But the book adds so much more that the film can't. And to be fair, no film can do what a 700-odd page biography can. But I think critical aspects of Oppenheimer were missing. The bit that really appealed to me as someone who's into literature was how much of a eccentric and intellectual Oppenheimer was. It explains a lot of his artistic temperament. And Oppenheimer was really, really clued into the intellectual scene. There was a really funny bit, in fact, when later on in life, when he's at the Institute in Princeton, and he invites T.S. Eliot. He was a huge fan of The Wasteland, and then reflects on it, going, "Yeah, that was a total mistake. He spent his time that he spent here at the Institute. All he did was work on the cocktail party, which was the worst thing he ever wrote." I feel like that intellectual side of him really goes some distance to explaining some of the things that are erratic or paradoxical about his nature. I think when the book describes his attitude later in life, that he had some mixture of pride in doing a beautiful job of making a dreadful weapon. That really makes sense by the end of the book. In the film, because I feel like a lot of that intellectual, artistic questing side of Oppenheimer is articulated by Cillian Murphy looking like a newt and staring into the middle distance, I feel like it's not really justified. The film's a bit better at explaining another really, really interesting side of Oppenheimer, which it sort of builds on that artistic side of him. Despite being artistically minded, I mean, he was writing poetry from a very young age, and, teaching himself multiple languages, reading poetry in foreign languages. Despite all that, he proved to be better as a organizer and facilitator of other brilliant minds than applying his own brilliant mind to original work. And this was true of, writing, as well as coming up with, a great thesis or a great discovery in the world of physics. He made the Trinity test happen, but he made it by combining the right people and inspiring great work. He knew how to get the best out of everybody. The film does go there, but again, it doesn't really land the same way if you don't have that image of him developed as a somewhat frustrated artist figure. If there's one thing I think was missing from the film, it was a sense of Oppenheimer as a active self-mythologizer. The image of him that comes away from the book was he was someone who was extremely conscious of his own reputation and own myth-making. The book is subtitled American Prometheus for a reason. In later life, he made lots of iconoclastic-sounding comments about his reputation, his guilt, the famous quoting from the Bhagavad Gita, and so forth. Whereas I think in the film, Oppenheimer feels like a bit of a passenger, swept up by the currents of history. Like the dropping of the bomb was a completely unavoidable act of God. It was a question of when, not if. That isn't the story that emerges from the book, for me anyway, and I think the book is not only stronger for it, but a bit more responsible. So in this case, book versus film, it's an easy win for the book. I really recommend it. If you saw Oppenheimer and liked it, then I think you'll really enjoy American Prometheus. And if you're just interested in that side of history, then even more so. Strong recommend.